They said I was too old to show up at my grandson's birthday. I sent a gift anyway. Inside the box rested a letter and a key. When they opened it, the party stopped dead. Family story. I still hear my son's voice on that Tuesday afternoon, flat and careful the way people talk when they've already decided you're the problem. Mom, it's just easier if you don't come. Mason's turning 10. Brittany planned a big backyard thing with the neighbors and the HOA folks. You're 73. The heat, the noise, the long drive. We don't want you getting worn out. He paused like he expected me to agree. We'll send pictures. I sat in the kitchen of the house Frank and I built in 1989, the same Formica counter under my elbows, the same window looking out on the maple that had dropped its first leaves early that year. Easier. Too old. I said nothing for a long moment. Then I told him I understood and hung up. I did not understand. Not the part about the heat. I still walked the length of our street every morning. Not the part about the noise. I had raised 2 boys through baseball seasons and garage bands. What I understood was the new distance that had grown between us ever since Frank's funeral 3 years earlier. Brittany had started calling the shots. The visits got shorter. The phone calls got thinner. Last Christmas they forgot to pick me up for the church service and later said the roads were bad. The roads were fine. Mason used to climb into my lap and ask me to tell the story about the summer Frank taught him to bait a hook at the lake house. That lake house was the one thing Frank left me that still felt like us. 22 acres of quiet water and tall pines an hour north of town. We paid it off the year Derek was born. Brittany had started mentioning how much the property taxes must be, how the market was hot, how a place like that could set a young family up. Derek never argued with her in front of me. He just looked at the floor. I spent the rest of that Tuesday and most of Wednesday sitting at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and the small brass key that hung on the hook by the back door. The key to the lake house. Frank had cut a spare the week before he died and pressed it into my hand. If anything happens, this is still yours to give, he said. I had kept it. I wrote the letter in longhand because Mason still liked my handwriting better than anything typed. I told him I was sorry I could not be there to watch him blow out the candles. I told him that being 10 was a big deal and that his grandfather would have been proud of the way he still said please and thank you even when no one was looking. Then I wrote the part that mattered. I wrote that the key in the box opened the front door of the lake house. I wrote that the deed had already been transferred into a trust in his name, with me as trustee until he turned 21. The lawyer had filed the papers Monday morning. No one could sell it. No one could borrow against it. It would be waiting for him the same way the water and the pines had waited for Frank and me. I told him the combination to the lockbox inside the mudroom where the fishing rod still stood. I signed it the way I always had. Love, Grandma. I packed the letter and the key inside a plain wooden box Frank had made years ago for Christmas ornaments. I wrapped it in brown paper and wrote Mason's name in thick black marker. Then I drove to the post office myself and paid for overnight delivery. The clerk asked if I wanted insurance. I said no. Some things you just send and let the world decide. I did not sleep much that night. I kept seeing Brittany's face when the paper came off. I kept hearing Derek's voice trying to explain something he could not explain. Mostly I kept seeing Mason's hands opening the box while the other kids waited for cake. The package arrived Friday morning, the day of the party. I know because my sister Carol called me from the backyard at 2:17 in the afternoon. Carol had been invited. She always was. Brittany liked having one relative who still smiled for photos. Carol's voice was low and tight. Dorothy, they just opened it. Right there on the picnic table in front of everybody. Brittany thought it was another toy. Derek was holding the camera for the kids. Mason pulled the letter out first and started reading out loud the way he does when he's proud. He got to the part about the key and the lake house and the trust and then he just stopped. Brittany grabbed the paper. Her face went white. Derek said something under his breath I couldn't catch. The music was still playing but nobody was talking. One of the neighbor women asked if everything was all right and Brittany just said the party was over. She told people there had been a family emergency. Kids were crying because the cake hadn't been cut. Mason kept holding the key like it might disappear. Carol said Derek walked straight into the house without looking at anyone. Brittany stayed outside long enough to smile at the remaining guests and thank them for coming. Then she followed him. Carol said the last thing she saw was Mason sitting alone at the picnic table, turning the brass key over and over in his small hands. I sat in my kitchen and waited. The phone rang at 4:40. Derek. His voice was different this time. Not careful. Raw. What the hell did you do? I told him exactly what I had done. I told him the lawyer's name and the file number. I told him the trust could not be broken without a court order and that I had no intention of giving one. I told him the lake house had never been theirs to sell. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Brittany is furious. She thinks you did this to punish us. I did this because you told me I was too old to sit in a folding chair and watch my grandson turn 10, I said. Everything else is just the truth finally written down. He hung up. I did not hear from them for 11 days. On the 12th day Mason called from his mother's phone. His voice was small and careful the way children's voices get when they know the adults are still angry. Grandma Dot? Can I still come to the lake house someday? I told him yes. I told him the key was his and the water was still cold in the mornings and the same old rowboat was tied to the dock. I told him I would be there whenever he was ready. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Mom cried after everybody left. Dad just sat in the garage. They don't know I heard them. Mom said the house was supposed to help with the new car and the private school. Dad said they should have been nicer to you. I closed my eyes. Outside my window the maple had lost more leaves. The street looked the same as it had the day Frank and I moved in. You don't have to choose sides, I told him. You just have to keep the key someplace safe. He said he would. He said he had already put it on the same chain as the little soccer medal he won last spring. Then Brittany's voice came into the background and the call ended. I set the phone down and looked at the empty hook by the back door where the key used to hang. The house felt larger without it. Quieter. I made a cup of tea and sat at the table until the light left the kitchen. 3 weeks later a thick envelope arrived from the lawyer confirming the trust was recorded and the property taxes would now be paid from an account I had set aside years earlier. No one called to argue. No one came to the door. Carol told me the backyard looked different the next time she drove past. The picnic table was gone. The string lights had been taken down. I still walk the length of the street every morning. Some days I stop at the corner and look north, toward the highway that leads to the lake. I picture the key on a boy's chain next to a soccer medal. I picture the door opening someday when he is tall enough to reach the lock without help. The water will still be there. The pines will still be there. The rest of it is already written.